Hey, deserving listeners, happily ever after, let's watch and see what happens.
Hopefully we can open the eyes a little bit at the therapist. Telling you, I'm willing to listen, but I want to see results. I don't want to see like bull.
Okay, so Elizabeth and Andrei and family are going to a family therapy session. As a family therapist myself, I'm extremely intrigued and curious as to how this will go. Usually I have overblown expectations and hopes and optimism, and usually the session doesn't go very well, or they only go to one session or something like this. So I would suspect that best case scenario, and I don't know who's going to be there in the session, but even if it's just a few people, I can't imagine it going well in the first session. There's so much fusion, there's so much conflict, there's so much contempt. I mean, it'd be hard to imagine a family that didn't have more contempt between various different family members. And seemingly, it's hard to imagine, well, I can imagine a family, in my 25 plus years, I've treated a lot of different clients. Full disclosure, I haven't seen a family client in a number of years. The first 15 years of my career, I would say about a third of my clients were families. So, that's 10 hours, 15 hours a week of family therapy time. And yeah, it's chaotic. And also, just on this topic, when I first decided to become a therapist, a counselor, when I was 24 years old, I didn't know about marriage and family therapy. I mean, I guess I kind of knew about it, but I didn't know it was a field. And it was kind of a burgeoning field at the time in the mid-90s. I mean, it emerged in earnest in the 70s and 80s, but in the 90s, it started to become professionalized, its own profession, and with its own licensing process, its own graduate programs. Often before, it was just an offshoot of the counseling profession, but in the 90s, it became really solidly its own profession. And I went to an open house at my university at Antioch in Seattle, and they presented the two options at the time. Now at Antioch, we have all sorts of options, but at the time, there were just two options of a master's degree. You could get it in counseling or marriage and family therapy. And with counseling, it was said that it was more geared towards individuals, but with marriage and family therapy, you also get trained to work with individuals, but you, in addition, get trained to work with couples and families. And upon hearing that, I just instantly thought, well, that sounds great, because I want options. I'm kind of that sort of person. I like there to be options. I don't like to be limited in terms of options. And I worried that if I chose the counseling route after graduation, I would wish that I had that other training. And it was intriguing to me that in marriage and family therapy, you also get trained to work with individuals. And incidentally, I would say that over half of my client hours in my 25 plus years have been with individuals, even though I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm also trained as a psychologist, which is a whole other thing that I could talk about. But anyway, so with families, I imagined, and it was true, that, and really a lot more so than I thought, that the work would be very dynamic, that working with couples and families would be very exciting, and it is. Working with couples and families, the sessions usually go by very quickly because there's so much happening and there's so many things to talk about. With individual clients, although some individual sessions can be very dynamic and very exciting and very engaging, I would say most of the time, but occasionally you work with an individual client and the session is, it's just kind of subdued because the client is talking about relationships or their own issues. And, of course, it's a varied experience. But on average, couples and families, they come in the door with a lot to talk about, and they want to talk with that person about that. And so when I started working with couples and families, it was terrifying. I mean, and that would be the thing that I would often say, because eventually I became the person that was running open house for prospective students. And that question would come up, prospective students would be like, so how do I know if I should choose the counseling or the marriage and family therapy program? And there were a lot of different points to bring up. But one of the points I brought up was that I said as a litmus test, when I propose to you that you have the option of working with couples and families, are you either terrified and dread that sort of work, or are you terrified and it intrigues you? Because it's going to terrify you, because really all prospective students, and really students in general, are terrified of being a therapist because there's just so much at stake in terms of their responsibilities, but also just their career. Because, you start out in graduate school and you really have no idea if you're going to be any good until like years later when you actually start to work with clients that you want to work with. Anyway, so I'd say baseline, all y'all are going to be terrified of working with couples and families, but do you dread that fear or does it intrigue you? And it was usually like half and half. And so that was one litmus test that would indicate that maybe marriage and family therapy was for you. And that's what it was for me. It was terrifying, but it intrigued me. And when I actually started working with couples and families, it was 10 times more intriguing and more exciting than I even imagined it would be. There's so much that happens. And another thing I would say at open house was, it's one thing, because so many people come to therapy talking about their relationships, whether it's their spousal relationships, work relationships, family relationships, friend relationships, whatever, with their kids, with their parents. And so when an individual comes into therapy, we can do a lot of work. There's a lot of pros and cons to doing relational work with individuals. And so we can obviously get a lot done. But when we actually have that individual in session and they're a client as well, we can actually facilitate the attachment and the conflict resolution and the love and the open communication right there. Instead of me trying to coach someone to go home and do that, we can do it right there. And for me as a therapist, I get to see the fruits of that labor. I get to see the clients, the families bond and resolve conflicts and see each other's vulnerabilities and express vulnerabilities and to hold hands and to cry and to reconcile and to express love and hug each other. To send an individual client home and to have them come back a week later and to report that things went well, that's gratifying, of course, but to see it happen right there, there's really nothing else like it. I'm curious as to see how this will go. I can't, again, so the prediction I would have, best case scenario, is that it would be one of 5 to 10 introductory sessions that would just get the family members used to family therapy because there's so much volatility. I just can't imagine that a huge breakthrough would happen in the first session, but I don't know, we'll see. Oh, the other thing that I wanted to react to is that Andrei said, well, let's rewind that and hear what he said because I want to comment on the thing that he said.
Hopefully we can open the eyes a little bit at the therapist. Telling you, I'm willing to listen, but I want to see results. I don't want to see like bull.
He's coming in defensive, which is normal, and couples and families, I don't know, I'd say about at least 90% of the time, to some extent, to sometimes a great extent, the family members are coming into the office having no differentiation or responsibility as to their part in the problem. They are thinking, well, I hope the therapist blasts my father-in-law or my sister-in-law or my spouse or something, because I know that I'm only, I everything that I do that's bad in this relationship, I'm only doing it because other people are making me do these things. And literally everyone can come into the office with that attitude. So how do you change that around? They come into the office hoping that the therapist will blast other people. How do we get each of them to take responsibility for themselves? Because that's the only thing that they can change. And if everyone takes on that responsibility and actually recognizes what they're doing to contribute and how they can change things, then change will happen. Whereas if everyone is pointing fingers, no change will happen, in all likelihood. And there are a lot of different methods to this in family therapy, but it requires a lot of diplomacy, a lot of artfulness as a therapist to lead people down that road. Because another thing is you'll be triangulated instantly as a therapist in couple and family therapy. In that way, they are triangulating me. They're trying to get me to agree with them that the other person is the problem. So I'm being sucked into various different conflicts. And how do I validate everyone in the room while not alienating other people in the process? It's a very, very complicated thing. So anyway, Andrei says that he wants results and he doesn't want any BS. And in addition to him saying that he doesn't think he has a problem, he is also saying that he wants results. And I would get that often. People would come into the office, it's especially if there's 5 family members that are showing up, everyone has to take at least a couple hours out of their day to get there. It's a high stress situation. And of course you want results. And as a therapist, again, it takes an artful, diplomatic, experienced, confident family therapist to be able to, I don't know what to say. I mean, it depends on the situation, of course, but often in this situation, well, what would my approach be? If I detected that, and I probably would assume, because a lot of people have that attitude, like there better be results by the end of session, especially if I'm picking up some, resistance in the family members, I would try to, so I'd point out what I thought they could benefit from working on to set a stage of like, this is what we're going to do. Because I want to be pretty concrete about that. And that's a good idea, regardless of resistance or not. I would also try to find strengths, obviously, like bonding. And, I guess with Andrei, I'd ask him, well, when were things going well? And I would hope that Andrei would bring up that time when they were all with the sisters anyway, with Elizabeth's sisters. I can't remember their names. It's Jen and is it Debbie or anyway? And then Andrei with those two sisters and Elizabeth, they were all on the same page regarding Charlie. And I would hope that Andrei would say, well, there was this kind of nice time when I felt like I was a part of the family. And then actually I would key in on, even without watching the show, that I would say, oh, so when you scapegoated Charlie, that's when the family accepted you. And so when they're not scapegoating Charlie, you're the scapegoat. I mean, it's a fairly fundamental family therapy assessment dimension that is, it's sort of like family therapy 101, that who's the scapegoat and how does the scapegoat change from person to person. And so I'd pick up on that. But at the very least, I could highlight that in that moment. Oh, so you felt close to them and you felt supported, you felt included, you felt like people understood you. So you are capable of a family of actually understanding each other. And even though there's been a lot of conflict, it sounds like if we can find how we can get there, and I might even drop in, without perhaps alienating one person in the family when you're doing it, how can everyone understand each other better? So I'd try to point that out. But in terms of like results, I'm trying to think like knowing what I know about the family, like what I would try to engineer. I think a result that I could strive for would be for the most conflictual family members, maybe Andrei and Jen or something, would be able to have a civil-ish conversation, which would be a result, right? It's like, okay, at the very least, Elizabeth and maybe Chuck would be able to go like, oh, thank God that they got those two people to talk in a civil way. It wasn't great, but it, step in the right direction. So I guess that's what I would try to do. But, I worry that Andrei, what he means is I better see the therapist blast someone and get someone to admit that they're wrong. That's the result I'm looking for. But I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Baby, you need to take this more seriously.
I would try too many years now, like to work, to get along with these losers. I want to pursue that thing because I don't care about that.
Now, I do not blame Andrei. Given what we've seen on this show, I don't blame him for having a lot of resentment and contempt and a lot of anger and a lot of pessimism about things, because it's been years and years and repeated attempts by these two, particularly Libby, to bridge the gap, and the sisters and the family have just been horrendous. I mean, that earlier in the season when that one sister said what she said, it's just like, yeah, I hope he gets deported. I mean, whoa, and other kinds of things. And then the sister was violent with him on that picnic table, recently. And the sister has been violent before with other. I think the sister was, when they were on that boat, was violent with Libby. I mean, but I think, well, maybe Libby might have started that. Anyway, point is Andrei has a lot of reasons to be upset and to come into the situation not trusting that people would give him a fair shake. Even if they temporarily do, he could in his mind go, well, we've been here before. They're eventually going to turn on me. And we've seen various different family members turn on each other and have conflict, but I just want to, in my opinion, the level of contempt and irrational attacking that they've had. I mean, could they complain about some things about Andrei? Sure. But just the level of the contempt and I don't know, maybe we don't see what Andrei has really done to deserve it. I can't know, but from what we see on the show, it's been 90+% completely undeserved and rigid. So, yeah, to the point where Libby has recognized it for a long time and has seemingly started to cut herself off from some of her family, which, makes sense.
Today is a big day. The entire family is getting together for a huge therapy session. And I feel like this is probably going to be one of the last opportunities to mend things with my family.
Now, I would dispel that right away as a family therapist, or at least offer up the option and lower the expectations for one session to solve all the problems. I would probably lay out, given if they accurately describe the situation, I would say, well, it's probably going to be at least 3 sessions for all y'all to just get used to this process, because it's pretty vulnerable, pretty weird, pretty new and tense. And what we know from research is that when people have a lot of tension, whether you are aware of it or not, it affects your cognitions, your brain, your nervous system, such that it's really difficult to remain calm and to remain rational when you are having all this cortisol pumping through your veins. So at least a few sessions just to get used to it. And what I'm going to work on is I'm going to be assessing things, and I'm also going to be trying to find strengths. I'm going to be also trying to find some problem areas that y'all are going to work on, and I'll tell you I'm the sort of therapist, I'm always going to tell you what's in my head. So I'll just tell you as soon as I can. And then I would say another 3, 5, 7 sessions where we actually, y'all are comfortable enough in session where you can actually start to work on things. We might do some breakout sessions where it's just 2 of you or 3 of you or something, maybe not everyone at the same time. Everyone's going to have to work. Everyone's going to have to try. But I'll tell you, as a family therapist, I've worked with extremely conflictual families with seemingly a lot more problems than what your family is facing. So I have a lot of optimism if everyone says that they're going to try. And the hope is that once we set up a new routine and a new understanding of each other, because often it is just a matter of misunderstanding, because when we're upset and hurt and scared, we can come off as angry, which can be misinterpreted as anger, when in reality, you're just feeling hurt and vulnerable and scared. So I'm going to be talking about that kind of stuff. And, we could just imagine 10 sessions that a lot of deeper understanding, a lot of more safety to express how you really feel to each other. And then I would say there'd be another 10 plus sessions of solidifying the changes to make sure that you don't revert back to old things. But to be clear, in the first session, we're not going to see great changes, because that just isn't, it's almost never the case that in one session you can completely erase all of the hurt feelings and all of the anger and all of the patterns that have led you to here. So, just keep that in mind.
With this new baby coming, I absolutely don't want to cut my family out of my life completely. And if we have to leave the country, I want to know that I'm leaving on a good note with everyone.
What do you think, now? Obama's going to come not
You
drunk?
need to cut it out with the insults, because that just makes people go from talking to getting physical with each other.
With Andrei, he seems like an aggressive, overly confident, dismissive sort of guy. But what I would suspect what's happening for him is that he is terrified. He is scared of not only just the family members ganging up on him, which would make sense, but also maybe of therapy in general, maybe that the therapist will side with the family against him. I mean, that's what's happened in the past. It seems like anyone who comes in this situation sides with the family in this extremely, what I'm just going to say, irrational way against Andrei. And I think he knows that Libby is on his side for the most part, but he also knows that Libby cares enough about her family that she would try to bridge that gap, that she's not going to completely alienate the family. So she's not completely in his camp, So I imagine that he feels extreme fear, which would make, and it's being filmed. So as a way of coping with that, he's getting upset. He's getting aggressive. That's his solution, is when he's afraid, he gets aggressive. And so Libby is trying to get him to not be that way. And so I guess if I were there, I would suggest, if I was a little angel the devil and angel, trying to help someone be constructive to Libby, I would say, tell him that you will support him, because if I'm guessing you made sure that he understood that you're on his side, that he will relax a little bit and thus be better able to control his behavior. Because I think he knows that he shouldn't come out of the gate yelling at everyone and insulting everyone. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.